This is Retropulse Music, and I'm Chris Shapiro. Joining us on the show today is a very special guest. He is one of the most successful international musicians in the world today. He's the founding member of Australian rock band Icehouse, a band that garnered 8 top 10 hit singles, and whose 1987 Man of Colors album spent an astounding 11 weeks at the #1 spot on the Australian charts. Joining us today is Mr. Iva Davies. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
And I wanted to point out again that you're literally on the other side of the world right now. It's Friday morning where you're at, and it's Thursday evening for us. This is like a real Back to the Future kind of thing for me. This is very cool for me. Thank you.
No problem. Yes, I am on the other side of the world. That's true.
All right, well, let's get right into it now. I want to start off talking about what it's like to take a band and transport it to the international stage, because you've had hits in Europe, in the U.S., in Canada, all across the globe. So what is it like to literally pick up for months at a time, leave home, go to another country, another culture you've never been to, with your band, with all the equipment? What's that like to experience as a band on the road?
It took me a while to work out what the difference is for Australian bands, and I think it's quite different for Australian bands than it is for bands that are based in Canada, the United States, or England, Europe, because everything in our terms is relatively close. If you're talking about going from New York to London, you're talking about going from London to Berlin or London to Amsterdam. That's incredibly close. It takes longer to drive between capital cities in Australia than it does for an American band to get to England. So for us, it was a huge, and I must say there are a lot of bands, especially in the 80s, from Australia who attempted to take on the world market and found that it was, apart from anything else, incredibly expensive. This was the main thing that kind of stopped a lot of Australian bands coming and touring the Northern Hemisphere more regularly. So that was what we were up against.
Now, do you still tour in the Northern Hemisphere at all, or are those days kind of not as frequent, or?
No, we haven't toured in the Northern Hemisphere for some time, and I guess we're no different in that respect to a lot of other bands from Australia who you'd be familiar with. For example, In Excess, Midnight Oil, and so on, who, at one point or another had huge success in the Northern Hemisphere, but because of what I'm talking about, the radical expense, the only option, which a few perhaps lesser-known Australian bands have taken, is to go and base yourself in Europe. For example, an Australian artist called Nick Cave, who had a band called The Birthday Party, you may be familiar with, and Chris Bailey from The Saints. And The Saints, of course, had a huge career very early in the punk period, and he's been based in Europe for a very long time, and that's the only option. So for the rest of us, we look for the opportunity to find a way to get over back to the Northern Hemisphere.
Now, back when you were touring in the Northern Hemisphere, what was one of your favorite countries to come to and play in?
Well, I think the thing is that our success shifted around. So early on we had very large success in Europe, and so of course that made that very fun to go and tour in Germany and even in places like Sweden and Norway. But then later on, we're talking about the period that you referred to, the album Man of Colors, which was quite a few years later. We had a lot of success in North America. North America is a very big place for a band to tour. I can tell you can keep driving and driving and driving and driving, and you never run out of cities. So it's an incredible place. There's just such a variety of cultures and climates even that North America is a place you could explore for the whole of your life.
I want to ask you, because I've learned that a great musician, when they've really mastered music, they're trying to capture either a moment of life or synthesize an aspect of life down to 3 or 4 minutes, the length of a song. And I noticed that in your song, Great Southern Land. And how does that impact your life or your aspect on life? Since you're always trying to narrow things down, how does that impact how you live life?
Well, you're referring to this particular song, Great Southern Land, and when I wrote Great Southern Land, it was actually 30 years ago this year that I wrote that song. And at the time, all I thought all I was doing was really trying to write a set of songs for a follow-up blow-up second album to what had been a huge first album. And I knew that it was an important subject. I knew that I didn't want to get it wrong. It was a song about my home country, and you don't get that sort of thing wrong because otherwise it'll blow up in your face. So I put an awful lot of effort and thought into it. But I was not prepared for the way that it was received, and these days, recently we've had an anniversary celebration of that 30 years, and even the Australian Tourism Government Authority has kind of taken on the song and used it for an online ad campaign, and it's widely referred to as the alternative national anthem. And there was just no way that you're talking about that 4 minutes, putting things into 4 minutes. There was no way that I anticipated that 30 years later that particular song, a song of mine, would be referred to as the alternate national anthem.
Yeah, because, I mean, like 3 or 4 minutes, that's hardly any time to capture everything that you want to say, and it had to be extremely difficult to, write lyrics that could resonate with everyone.
Well, I came to exactly that conclusion. I mean, we're probably both going through the same thought process, and the only way that I thought I could do that was to really kind of almost throw words at a wall. And if you listen to that particular song, it doesn't try to tell a story. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if you analysed it. But there are just a whole collection of 3-word phrases, and I had hoped that with those, I guess, apparently non-meaning 3-word phrases, there would be pictures, there would be something that people would listen to and hear and make up their, kind of fill in the gaps between, and thereby have some sort of opportunity of creating a picture.
Yeah, and another song that I love of yours is Electric Blue. And in my opinion, I think that's one of the most well-produced songs of that decade. And you teamed up with John Oates from Hall & Oates to write that song. And I was wondering the story of how you guys met and created that song together.
Well, I have to give full credit to John Oates because he's an incredibly enthusiastic musician. I mean, he has so much energy and interest and love of music. And when we first met was completely by accident. We were touring our second album. I was sitting in the airport in Adelaide, which is a capital city in South Australia, and this fellow came over to me, and he had in his hand, he had a copy of the album that we were touring, and he shook my hand and he said, I'm John Oates. We played in the venue that you're about to play in tonight, and I bought your album, I love it, and congratulations, and shook my hand and walked off. And I thought, wow, that's so cool, that's amazing. But, to his credit, it was years and years later, and a number of albums later, that I was in New York in a hotel. We were touring, and the phone rang, and John Oates had tracked me down, and he absolutely insisted we should write songs together. He was adamant. He said, I will wait until the end of your tour, and when you go back to Australia, I'll come to Australia, and we will write songs. And exactly that happened, and we wrote Electric Blue in my little home studio in Sydney. He flew himself out in all of his gear, and even before it was finished, he said to me, you make a promise to me that you're going to record this and make it a single, because if you don't record it and make it a single, Hall & Oates will, and it will be a hit. And so he kind of knew stuff that I didn't know. I mean, it's to his credit, and I guess it's a measure of his aptitude as a songwriter, that he knew that even in its skeletal form, that this was a hit song.
Mm-hmm. And I was reading that the album for that song that was from Man of Colors, that the artwork for that was actually done with nothing more than a few crayons and nothing but a black pen. The artist, that's all he used. I find that really interesting.
Well, it was one of those kind of funny moments when you're an artist and you kind of there's a bit of a tug of war often. Certainly in those days when record companies were very highly involved in every aspect of putting together an album, even the order of the songs that were going to appear on the album. Somebody had an opinion about it, and I'd written a song called Man of Colors, and I had a fairly clear picture in my mind of, I guess, really the spirit of the song. And we gave the task to the record company art department to come up with a cover for Man of Colors, and all these very elaborate, very expensive looking, I might say, covers, designs came back to us, and they were all fairly complicated and kind of absurd. And I, at the time, was working with my lead guitarist, and he was a co-writer of a lot of the songs, and I said to him, Bob, this has got to be an incredibly simple cover, almost as if it was drawn by a child. And out of frustration, I walked up the street and I went to a local shop and bought a packet of crayons and a black texture colour. I don't know what you refer to, felt tip pen, I guess you call them, and came back and drew a picture. And it was really meant to just kind of give my guitarist an idea of the sort of simplicity that I wanted. But he looked at me and he said, that's the cover. It was only really because he was confident in it that we submitted it to the record company, and it became, as you quite rightly say, it became the cover.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I want to ask you another thing about that album. I've seen that there's a couple versions for the music video of the song Crazy. And my favorite is when you're in the radio station and you're the DJ and you're heading home for the night, because I can connect with that because I'm in a radio station right now. But I was wondering, does the record company have you film one music video for, say, Australia, and then another one for Canada, and another one for the U.S., or do you just make one and you send it out to all the countries? How's that work?
You're actually very close to the mark. What happened was we always kind of had two separate worlds in a way, because we had a record company that looked after Australia and New Zealand, and then we had a record company that looked after the rest of the world. So we're talking the United States and Europe and so on. And what happened on a couple of occasions, it didn't just happen for Crazy, but on a couple of occasions we made a music video in Australia for a song which was to be released before it was released in the rest of the world, and the international record company weren't happy with that music video for one reason or another. Sometimes it was a kind of technical reason, and on other occasions it was, they didn't think it was right for their market. So on a couple of occasions we had to make a second music video, and that was how that one came to be.
Okay, and I have to ask you, because is that the same woman who was in Electric Blue that was in Crazy?
Yes, it is indeed, and she was a young Australian actress. And in fact, the original casting for the original music video of Crazy involved two young ladies who were twins. But the original casting was for a very unknown actress to be in it, who unfortunately on the day couldn't turn up, and her name was Nicole Kidman.
No way.
So in another world we would have had Nicole Kidman in the very first Crazy video.
So she really missed out then. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Well, she was fairly unknown. She'd made one fairly unsuccessful movie here called BMX Bandits, which I'm sure she'd rather not have anybody know about, but there it is, it's out there. But she was actually booked for the video shoot, and I think she was sick on the day, and we had some replacements brought in. But the young lady you're referring to, who was in the Electric Blue video and also the international Crazy video, went on to have a film career and a TV career as one of the goddesses in Xena, I think it was, and she's probably best known for wearing those costumes.
That's amazing. I've always thought she was really beautiful every time I've seen that video, but that's crazy about Nicole Kidman. You never know, you know? But I do want to wrap up, but I want to ask you one last question, because I feel like you're an amazing artist, and I really think that you'll be able to answer this question very well, given the success that you've had. What do you think is the biggest challenge or challenges facing the music industry, both for the artist and for the record companies, because they really have a partnership? What do you think they have to work together to overcome, given this day and age?
Well, I think in part they have to overcome their own historical model. The historical model that had existed for decades was based on the fact that a technology that was invented early in the 1900s, in fact maybe in the late 1800s, that is the technique of being able to capture sound on a medium and then sell it. That historical model doesn't exist to all intents and purposes today. In other words, there is not a monopoly on being able to put music in a bottle and sell it to somebody. And that's where the difficulty is, as far as the old school record company is concerned. But the younger, more vibrant record companies will find a way of making music a viable business, because one thing that I'm absolutely certain of is that music is incredibly important in people's lives, and even more so these days that they have so much more access to music. I remember, for example, when I went to school, this is before iPods and MP3 players and the internet and all of that stuff. I reckon when I was at 18, I owned 3 albums, which I'd had to save up and buy over a long period of time. And my daughter is now 18, the same age, and she listens to literally tens of thousands of songs. So that tells me that there's a huge demand. So it's just a matter of how do we capitalize on that demand.
And do you have any advice for how they can maybe go about doing that?
I think the key, the secret is almost reverting to the model pre-recording, which is that the key is really about performance. And we certainly got a huge advantage early in our career because we toured non-stop for 3 years before we put a record out. And so that we already had a huge market ready, waiting to buy what we were going to put down on a recording. And to me, the focus now is swinging back to live performance. And if we can get live performance more accessible and more part of a lifestyle choice, I think that's the key.
All right, and if I ever make it to Australia, I definitely want to check out one of your live shows, Iva, because you're a great musician, and I thank you so much for being on the show today, and it's really been an honor speaking with you today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the possibility that we might be able to get over there to play. That'd be great
Definitely.
fun.
You need to come to Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, all right? I know it's going to be a long flight for you, but I think you definitely should make it, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a date.
All right, good deal. I'll talk to you later. Have a wonderful day, sir.
Thank you.